Gregg Braden interview, take one.
I was trained as a scientist. My background's in the hard sciences, physical sciences, the earth sciences. In the 60s and 70s, when I received that training, there was no room for the possibility of the kind of things that we're talking about now, the kinds of things that suggest that our inner world and our inner thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs in any way affect the world around us. And it was through direct experience. What I began to understand was that this is the great secret that everyone knows except us in the West. Almost any other culture that we go to, from the monasteries in Egypt and Tibet and India into Bolivia and Peru, the indigenous traditions, little villages in the Andes Mountains, they all know that there is this experience that we can have inside of our bodies that affects our world in some way, and our science simply has not allowed for that historically. But I was trained as a scientist, and I was trained to look in the world around me for my answers, so I began to go to these places. I began to go into the monasteries, all the places that I mentioned. And it was through the direct experience of sitting in the presence of people who have lived and practiced the kinds of traditions that Louise Hay and the other authors I'm so blessed to be sharing this, the stage and this information with, that they teach about. And what we begin to understand is that this is the place where science got it wrong. There are two places, two assumptions that science has made, modern science. And they're coming full circle and correcting that now. But the first one is that the space that we believe is empty is not really so empty. It's full of a living essence, of a living material that we're only beginning to understand. Number two, the fact, and it is a fact now, that we may have experiences inside of our bodies that influence the world beyond our bodies through the conduit of what's in this space. So it was in going into the monasteries and the nunneries and speaking with the indigenous people, looking at them eye to eye, heart to heart, God to God, and I could say to these people, when you just performed that miracle, when you just performed that miraculous healing, what is it that you did inside of your body to make that happen? And if I didn't understand what they told me, I'd ask them again and again and again through the translators until I understood that they were creating an experience, producing an effect inside of their bodies that my science never told me was possible or existed. And that was the path that led me. I just want to emphasize, science is good. And I believe our science is good and served us well. It simply is incomplete. And so it was that path that allowed me to flesh out the missing pieces that we're only beginning to understand today, marrying the best science of our time with the wisdom, 5,000 years of wisdom of our past, into a greater understanding. And that understanding brings us right back to the question. That's a long answer to a short question. But it brings us back to where we're only now beginning to understand that there is something that we can do in our lives that influence not only the physical body, ours and those of other people around us, but literally influence the physical reality of our world, and that changes everything. It changes everything that we in the West believe about ourselves. So as a scientist, I've also come to understand this is a very different way for many people to think about themselves and their world. And I've found that there's a learning curve that our audiences and our friends and families and coworkers in my career at the Water Fountain, this is not something that people typically talk about in a technical organization. They don't wake up in the morning and say, what kinds of feelings, what kinds of dreams, what kinds of healings did you have over the weekend? And they're talking about who won the football game and who won the lotteries. But this is where it brings us, the relevance in our lives, because we all are having experiences every day whether we are consciously aware of it or not, those experiences are physically affecting our bodies and our world. What Western science now is beginning to understand, only in the last years of the 20th and now the first years of the 21st century, it is now a scientific fact that the space between things is anything but empty. It is full of a living, pulsating essence that is so new, scientists have yet to agree on a single term. Some are calling it a quantum hologram, very technical sounding name. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the former Apollo astronaut, I've had the honor of sharing a stage with him a number of times. He calls it nature's mind. Stephen Hawking calls it the mind of God. Others simply call it the field. In 1944, the father of quantum physics, Max Planck, identified the existence of this field, and he called it the matrix. He said, underlying everything that we see, our bodies included, everything we see in the world around us in our bodies, he said, there is the existence of what must be a conscious and intelligent mind. This is his language in 1944. He said that this mind is the matrix of all matter, and it's from his work that the movie series began and many of the ideas that we have today.
The biggest thing that I bring to the planet right now is to simply look at ancient prophecies that we know to exist, that we can document in great detail, and to then give a scientific framework for these prophecies on such an advanced level that we're looking at things in an entirely different way. So let's get back to 2012 Enigma for a minute. Most of you have seen that video. You may remember that I discuss an experiment that was conducted in which a tiny, what's called buckyball, was shot through a grating, and the grating is 100 nanometers wide. The buckyball itself is only about 1 or 2 nanometers wide. It goes through the grating and it turns into a wave. The buckyball itself, which is supposed to be a macroscopic object, goes through this little slit, and for whatever reason it turns into a non-local wave. Now again, I talked about the experiment where buckyballs are shot through a 100 nanometer grate, a little tiny slit. They turn into a wave just by hitting the grate. It's like it makes them flip inside out and go from space-time, where they're a particle, into time-space. That solid particle, which has 120 atoms in it, it's not just like some tiny little thing. It's a ball. It's got structure. It's got form. It's got shape. It literally popped out of our space-time entirely. It flipped over into a realm where time is three-dimensional, space is one-dimensional, and it smears out. It's partly in the past, it's partly in the present, it's partly in the future. And in that state, it looks like a wave because you can't measure where everything is anymore. So now get a load of this. The DNA molecule is only slightly wider than a buckyball, which means the DNA molecule is also subject to quantum effects, in which the molecules within your DNA are phasing between being here in space-time and being in time-space, where they actually are stretched out through linear time. And they're sensitive to all the other energy fields around them.
Apparently, the way it works is that when you die, your soul continues, and your soul memorizes your DNA. So when the soul comes into the new body, it has the DNA of the old body.
Because we were running out of time. So we've already seen now that you have DNA that has been created out of the ether. Same species at both poles. You've seen the little guys that grow in the test tube from nothing more than distilled water and sterilized sand, and there's this little scum that grows on top, and you look at it under a microscope, and boom, here's these little critters. What about DNA changing from one form to another? What about transforming DNA from one form to another so that you have the given genetic material of one species and it transforms into something else? Well, Conchazin is the guy here. And so what he does in this anatomically correct diagram is he's got your duck over here. You can see the feathers and the head. Oh, there he is. And over here you have a perfectly described chicken. Obviously, I'm being facetious. And what you have here is these little funnels that are built into the side of a little pentagonal box. And he zaps this little duck with microwaves, and all the microwaves go through these copper pipes from one room to another. If you talk in here, you'll hear it in here. It's air that can pass through. He's zapping it with microwaves, which are not going to kill the duck. It just kind of zaps his energy field enough to make it resonate, make the DNA resonate. And over here you have a chicken that has eggs in its womb. So now I want you to look at the physiology of a duck. Notice the long beak, the webbed feet, the longer neck, the larger internal cavity of organs. Whereas a chicken, by comparison, this is not what they looked like when they came out, by the way. That's just to fool you. I actually found this when I was looking for the picture of the chicken with the webbed feet, and then I found him with ducks, or her with ducks, and I'm like, wow, isn't that a synchronicity? So anyway, look, shorter beak. No webbing between the toes. This is what actually hatched. These are called duck hens. You see webbing between the toes. You see this strange-looking head. We can get a better look at it here. The eye's position is different. You get the duck-shaped head, the longer beak, the webbing between the toes. Now here's the stats. He zapped a total of 500 eggs, 480 of them hatched. 80% had a flat duck-shaped head like you just saw. 90% had the shift in the position of the eyes. 90%. And 25% had webbing appear between the toes. This is a Chinese scientist who did this. It's an amazing piece of research. Of course, it goes without saying that for those of you who haven't seen this, when they haven't seen it before, there's a gasp in the audience, but you all are well initiated. Edgar Cayce and myself, there's obviously a facial similarity there. This is my brother and Casey's first guy, Dr. Ketchum, who got him out there in the world. My father, after a Metallica concert, that's why he's sneering. And the Squire, Edgar Cayce's father. My father would only shop at the Squire shop, and everybody called Cayce's father the Squire. This is my best friend Jude and Edwin Blumenthal from the Cayce tradition, one of his principal investors. Jude and I did marvelous music together in high school, at least we thought so at the time. And this is my friend from college, Christopher, and his corresponding reincarnation, Morton Blumenthal. This is my good friend from college, Angelica, and this is Edgar's wife, Gertrude. These are like the only people I'm still in contact with from high school and college. I mean, you have to understand, these are not just random people from my life. These are like some of my closest associates and friends. And then when you find out that they're the same people as in Edgar's circle, it's very, very surprising.